Hi, and welcome to Social Work 664. This is week 6, and this week we really focus on expanding our awareness of trauma principles from the individual and the families to thinking about it as a universal precaution or principle that we would take with anyone that we're working with and with all of us. So with this week, we hope that you are able to increase your knowledge base of some therapeutic practices in your readings and also in the videos that you'll watch. We also hope you step away being able to refine your skills a little bit more in assessing and determining the impact of trauma for someone who has experienced it, as well as from a multi-dimensional perspective, that micro, meso, and macro perspective of a clinical social worker. And last of all, to demonstrate some techniques that you have been learning along the way, from breathing to progressive muscle relaxation to Tai Chi to things that really help us calm down that central nervous system and our activated alarm system so that we can increase our ability to express our emotions, to regulate our emotions, and to build trust and connection with those around us. So for this week, your readings will focus, as usual, on Bruce Perry's book, and you will have chapter 11. We will be reading chapter 7 in Rothschild, and in Vanderkolk, part 5, Paths to Recovery. You'll see that this week is entitled Stage 3 Treatment, and this refers to Judith Herman's model of healing from trauma. Stage 3 is about reintegration and reconnection to a community around one. The idea of coming in with a new transformed self. We want you to look at the PowerPoint, which will talk about the sanctuary model by Sandra Bloom. And this is one of the most widely known trauma-informed organizational change models. So it's geared at the level of organizations from the top down, the bottom up, and really imbuing organizations with the principles to create a trauma-informed framework. And last of all, we would like for you to watch the film Antoine Fisher, which you may be very familiar with. This came out in the 90s. And to rent this, you can rent it for very cheap on a variety of different forums. I've actually found it on YouTube as well for free. So if you search around enough, you can find that. And to be able to reflect and comment on that movie. For our first discussion forum, you will watch Antoine Fisher, and then in response to my post, I want you to answer the following questions as your means for reflecting. So you'll see what occurs that engages Antoine in the therapy, how does Antoine change during the therapy, what changes in his therapist, looking at this parallel process. Once Antoine is finished with therapy, what does he need to reintegrate into the culture or society? And to just really comment on what his gains in therapy are, what does he need to trust people outside of that therapeutic relationship, and last of all, any concerns that are raised. Now, of course, this is a movie, but it is based on a real story. You don't need to respond to your peers, but you're highly encouraged, especially for this, as we're nearing the final weeks, the more that we can engage in a dialogue and really enhance each other's learning, the greater our own learning will be. Our second discussion forum will be our technique demonstration. This will be our final week of technique demonstrations. And as described before, if you have a technique demonstration this week, you want to make sure that you post as an initial post both your video and written instructions. You will also want to put that in a major projects and assignments area, because that is the area that the actual video and written instructions will be graded. For the posting, you'll be graded on your discussion forum post. If you did not have a technique demonstration for this week, you do want to just watch and follow along with your other peers' technique demonstrations, and then just respond to each of your peers. I'm really encouraging you to do that in a positive, proactive way. I think people really have that down. But if you can also talk about how the technique worked for you, how it could change to work for you better, try to include a sentence or two about a population you could use this technique with in your practice. And if you're able to bring in some of our course materials, this is really our stretch goal for this. Our major focus for this week will be the trauma explanation summary video, and I know groups have been working on this and really preparing for this. So again, this is where you work with your partner or partners, create a Zoom video. So you're recording your interaction on the video, and it's really not an interaction per se. It is a monologue by one partner to the other, but using the other partner as a presence to really project that client image on. And this tends to be a lot more lifelike and authentic than when you're speaking just to a camera. And so this is the reason that we chose Zoom to be the technique for this. So you will focus on your type of trauma, figure out who your potential hypothetical client is going to be. And based on who that is, you want to adjust your tone, your understanding of what that person could understand developmentally, and really explain some of the impact of trauma and how it relates to that person. This can be a challenging assignment because you're thinking both about the person, you're also thinking about which of the core concepts of trauma you want to find a way to articulate. And, I think the biggest thing to really just make sure of is that both of you are seeing on the Zoom video that neither are muted, that there's volume in there. And these are typical areas that there's been some technology issues. You will see there is another video posted in week 5. I will repeat that link for week 6, and it explains specifically the trauma explanation summary. So I would like to talk a little bit more about a trauma-informed framework and to think through principles that are generally understood and agreed upon as key to establishing a trauma-informed system. And trauma-informed is definitely a buzzword that is happening throughout all of our nonprofits and our social services. And yet sometimes it really is just that, a buzzword, and isn't necessarily a systematic process or a set of principles that is agreed upon across the organization. And so I'm going to refer to really what is SAMHSA's trauma-informed approach. The Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, so really governmental entity. And really, they use a model of the 4 R's. And I think this is a nice way to understand trauma-informed frameworks. One is that there is just a basic realization about trauma and understanding how trauma can affect families, groups, organizations, communities, as well as individuals. And then also there is a recognition. So people in the organization or the system are able to recognize signs of trauma. This could be, based on gender, age, or specific to your setting. But it's really within those behaviors, how are these flags for trauma experiences? It doesn't necessarily need to require formal screening of trauma or assessments, although this can aid in recognizing some trauma. There is the 3rd R, which is responding. So this is bringing in knowledge about trauma into those policies, practices that happen in the organization, and procedures. And then the last R is seen as actively trying to resist systems and programs and rules and policies that create a re-traumatization. So really trying to prevent as much as possible triggering someone's trauma or re-trauma, and if so, responding to that. If there's a flashback that is triggered or a situation that somehow creates this trauma vortex to occur, this cycle of trauma. And so what SAMHSA sees as the key principles of an approach that is trauma informed is, one, to think about safety. And this can be interesting to consider, to what extent throughout the organization do people feel both physically safe, psychologically safe, morally safe, emotionally safe, and to question that in every program, in every type of service. The second key principle that is focused on is the idea of trustworthiness and being transparent. So this is the concept that all operations or decisions that are made in the organization are facilitated with this really high degree of transparency. So the goal is to just build, maintain trust with clients, with their family members, with staff, and just in every type of interaction. The third key principle is empowerment. It's the sense of peer support, the idea of mutual self-help, and it's just seen as a vehicle for establishing that safety and hope, the sense of trust, collaboration, and utilizing someone's own voice and stories, the lived experiences of trauma. The fourth principle is a sense of collaboration and mutuality, and this builds upon the peer support, but it's the focus on an equilibrium of power, knowing that power and control are the key things that are often lacking when someone goes through an experience of trauma. The fifth principle is a sense of empowerment, a sense of voice, choice in services. So it's the idea that the people being served run the agenda of the organization in some ways, and that those voices are listened to in a very close way. And last of all, recognizing the impact of cultural, historical, and gender issues. So moving past biases, stereotypes, and intentionally offering access to gender, cultural, responsive services, recognizing that there's immense healing power in many of our oldest cultural practices, and trying to have policies and protocols that recognize this and that see this as valid means for becoming part of this collaborative healing journey. So those are just some 6 key principles that you may want to think about as you reflect upon your different programs in your organization and your own ability, authority, and your auspice to enact some of these principles to make sure it's key to all of the services that you provide. With that, good luck with week 6. I look forward to seeing all of the trauma explanation summaries, some of your technique demonstrations, and your discussion forums. Have a great week.